Hello everybody, welcome to Sane Game Studios. I'm Sane, I'm an amateur game developer. Today I'm going to be doing a Gamemaker tutorial on enemy pathfinding. So how to get the enemy to track the player's position, as well as how to get the enemy to pursue after the player towards that position. There's going to be 3 different ways I'm going to be doing this. The first way is going to be super simple. It's literally only one line of code, and it's operates as simply as it's coded. So the enemy will be moving in a straight line directly towards the player, ignoring everything that's in its way, and then if it encounters an instance of our wall object, it is going to come to a grinding halt. The next one we're going to do is going to be a little bit more complex, but still fairly simple, and it's simply if it collides with the wall, it's going to move around it, and it's going to keep pursuing. The third one is the most complex one that we're going to do today, and it's going to make it so that the enemy will find a map in our room to find the best route to the player. Before I actually get started with this, I'd like to give a big shout out to 1UP Indie for making this video possible, because when I was trying to figure out how to do this for my own projects, it was his videos that showed me how to do it in the first place. And since then, I've managed to experiment with it and learn a lot about it to the point where I feel like I understand it enough to be able to make a tutorial for you guys. He did 3 videos on this. He did 1 video for each method, and he goes very in-depth on what's going on. So I'm actually going to throw links to those videos in the description below. And if you feel like you need a more detailed explanation of what I have going on here, you can just watch those videos, and he gets much more in-depth into everything that's happening. Also, if you hear any noises in the background, it is really early in the morning, and I just let my dog out, and she is feeling rather playful. So she is running around in the background with her toys. With that, we can jump into it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I have for my project jumping in. So essentially I have a room. I'm actually going to delete all these walls. I have an enemy, and I have a player. For my enemy object, I don't have any code. Just simple blank enemy. All of my sprites are 32 by 32. That's going to be important information later on, kind of. For my player object, I have some super basic code. I'll show you guys real quick here. Make this bigger. So I'm declaring my variables for getting my player input, and I'm declaring my variables for calculating my movement. That's in the create event. And then if I go to the step event, I'm getting my player input. I am calculating if I should be in what direction I should be moving on the x-axis. I am checking for collisions with a wall on the x-axis, and if I am colliding, I am setting my horizontal speed to 0. And then I am updating my x position. And then here I am calculating how far and in what direction, whether or not I should be and in what direction I should be moving on the y-axis. I am checking as to if I'm colliding with a wall on the y-axis, and if I am, I'm setting my vertical speed to 0, and then finally, I'm updating my y position. Other than that, I have an wall object that has no code, and everything is set to 32 by 32. And as you know, I also have a room that just consists of an enemy and a player, and if I run this, I can move around, but the enemy does nothing. I can even touch it, and it doesn't hurt me, because I haven't done anything like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get the enemy to actually chase after the player, and then I'll put a wall in its way, so I can show you what happens when it hits a wall. So like I said, this first method is going to be very basic. I'm just going to go to the step event, and I'm just going to say MP linear path object. MP linear step object. And then my This is going to take 4 arguments. It's going to ask me where I want it to go on the X and Y axis, as well as how fast I want it to go there, and the object in which I want it to be avoiding. So where I want it to go on the X axis is towards the player, so I'm going to say oPlayer.x. And then on the Y axis, again, I want it moving towards the player, so I'm going to go oPlayer.y. Speed, I'm going to set that to 3, just because my player is set to 4, and I want to be able to move faster than my enemy. And then for the object, I'm going to have it avoiding a wall. That is legitimately all you gotta do. So now, just to demonstrate what happens when it hits a wall, I'm just going to place a wall. And then if I run that, it moves towards me, but it stops when it hits the wall. And as long as in its straight line towards me, there is a wall in between, it will not move. But if I go somewhere where no longer is there a wall between me and it will continue its pursuit. So, super basic, but as you can see by the fact that it stops and it hits a wall, it doesn't look very smart. The enemy looks like it has 0 intelligence. This is like back in the day when you would see an NPC constantly walking into a wall on like old 64 games or something. But when it comes to enemy pathfinding, when it comes to anything in coding, you gotta learn to walk before you can run, and you gotta learn to crawl before you can walk, and this is crawling. So, now that I've shown you guys how to crawl, I'm going to show you guys how to walk. So this is going to be slightly more involved, not by a whole lot. I'm going to go back into my enemy object, and I'm going to open up the create event, and I'm going to declare a variable, and I'm going to call it path, and I'm going to set that to undefined. And then I'm going to go, once I have that done, this just creates a variable called path, and it leaves it completely empty. To leave a variable empty, you can also set it to 0, but that affects the type of variable that it is, and it's always going to be expecting a number. I'm pretty sure that it would work fine even if you did that, but by leaving it undefined, it doesn't even know what type of variable this is, and we're going to make it an asset variable by putting the asset of a path into that variable, and yeah. So in the step event, I'm very simply going to say path equals path add. And this creates a path and then assigns it to the variable of path. This path doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't have any direction, it doesn't do anything. It is just like the potential for a path is now stored in this variable, and we can now tell the path where we want it to go, as well as what we want it to avoid. So I'm going to go MP potential path object. I'm going to set this to path, because like the first thing it's going to ask is what path we want to be using, and the path that we want to use is the one that we assigned into our variable path. The next thing we're going to want to do is tell it XG and YG, and that's just X goal and Y goal, and again that's always going to be towards the player in this instance, well in this case. So oPlayer.x, oPlayer.y. Step size stands for pixels per frame. I'm just going to set that to 3 because that's what my speed's going to be. And then factor, I'm actually going to set that to 2, which is actually just an arbitrary number. I looked this up in the manual, and it says a factor is there to prevent an infinite loop. And they don't go very in depth into what that means, but the manual does say that it needs to be a number bigger than 1, so I'm just setting it to 2. Then the object in which we want it to be avoiding is a wall. And what that does is that creates a path. Like as soon as our enemy is created, it will draw a path from itself to the player, and it will do so while avoiding instances of the wall. And but it's not going to move along that path unless we do another function called path start. And this is going to take a few arguments. The first one's going to be what the path is, and the path is going to be path. The speed in which you want to be moving along the path. Again, I'm going to set that to 3 so that my player is moving a little bit faster than my enemy. The end action, I'm going to say path action stop. And then absolute, I'm going to set this to false. So to go a little bit into what I did here, path action stop is just what you want it to do at the end of the path. You can also go path action restart, path action continue, path action reverse. I'm just going to go path action stop so that if it reaches its destination on its path, it will stop moving. And then this, the absolute, I set that to false because if it's true, it's going to follow a path that you build in the path editor. We are not using the path editor in this case. We are just building the path through code. So we don't want it to be adhering to anything that we build in the path editor. We purely want it to just run itself and be independent. So I'm setting that to false. If you did build a path in the path editor, then if you wanted to, you could set that to true. But also, it wouldn't make sense to do it with this kind of setup. That would be more for like patrols. But anyways, I'm going to go to my room. And actually, I'm just going to run that. And then he's going to follow me. And when it hits the wall, it's going to move around. And it's just going to constantly be doing that. So as you can see, it looks a lot smarter. Now, when it hits the wall, it comes and it tries to bug. It goes around the wall and it continues its pursuit instead of just being hung up on a wall. This method does have its limitations, however. I'll show you real quick here. So if I were to build something like this and then run it, it's going to move in a straight line towards me, but then it's going to get stuck in between those two walls. Because in between me and the enemy is a wall, and it's trying to move around those walls. But when it tries to move around those walls, it collides with another wall, and it doesn't know how to handle that. So what we're going to do is, now that this is walking, running will show you how to deal with that. So now I'm going to be able to show you guys how to run. And the first thing I'm going to do actually is go back to my workspace. I'm going to go here. I'm going to delete this. And I'm actually going to create a new object. And I'm going to call this object game. I create this object with every single project that I make. I use it for overall game management. I use it a lot for saving and loading. It's very handy to just have a persistent object that can just manage everything. So with that, I'm going to go to the create event. And I'm going to set grid, which is a new variable. I'm going to set that to undefined. Because what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be creating a grid of the room, and then we're going to be filling that grid with instances of the wall, and then the enemy will use that grid to map its way to the player. So I'm going to go to the step event next, and I'm going to say if grid equals undefined. And I'm doing this check to make sure that we are only making a grid once. Because if you make a grid every single frame, it's going to get rather expensive on the processing. And we only need to make it once. And then we also only need to make it at the beginning of rooms. But I'll show you how to do that at the end of the video here. So I'm going to say grid equals MP grid create. And this is going to take quite a few arguments. Left and top is where we want the top left corner of the grid to start. I want the grid to fill the entire room, so I'm going to set that to 0, 0. Horizontal cells is how many cells of the grid you want spanning horizontally across the room. I'm going to be making my cells 32 by 32, and I want it to do its best to fill the room. Since I know my cells are going to be 32 pixels wide, to fill the room the best that I can, I'm going to have the game calculate how many cells it needs. So I'm going to go room width divided by 32. And then I'm going to do the same thing for vertical, except I'm going to go room height divided by 32. And then my cell width is going to be 32, and my cell height is going to be 32. Oh, typo. I'm not going to worry about the blue squigglies. That's just the feather feature. A lot of people actually just turn that off. But now I'm going to go MP grid add instances. And this is only going to take 3 arguments. The first one is going to be the ID of the grid, which is grid. And then the next one is going to be the object in which I want to add to the grid, and that's going to be a wall. And next is precise, and precise comes down to how you want to handle your collisions. So if you set precise to true, it's going to be pixel perfect. But if you set it to false, it's going to be based off of the bounding box. And I honestly can't really think of a single reason why the bounding box wouldn't be enough. So I'm just going to set it to false. So we're going to use the overall bounding box of the object. What this does is this function just takes this grid and it adds this object to that grid. And if you want to see exactly what I mean, I'll show you. I'm going to go to the create event. I'm going to go depth equals negative 1,000. I'm not sure if I have to do this for this, but I'm going to set my depth just in case. So I want it to be above everything else. And then I'm going to draw the grid so you can see what it is that I'm doing. So if grid does not equal undefined, MP grid draw grid. And before I run the room and look like an idiot, I'm going to put an instance of OGame in the room. You can put it absolutely anywhere. You're never going to see it. And as long as it exists, then it's going to do everything you need it to do. You can put it outside of the room. You can put it dead center of the room. You can put it inside your player. Well, I wouldn't recommend that, but you can put it absolutely anywhere. That doesn't matter. So if I run the game now, as you can see, all the green area is the usable space on the grid, and then the red area is wherever it was able to find instances of a wall. And then this little gray area on the side here, I wouldn't worry too much about that. That is legitimately just because the width of my room isn't evenly divisible by 32, and it's not going to have a partial cell at the end. So it's going to fill it with as many cells as it can evenly without going over. There's a couple ways you can combat this. You can set your horizontal cells to be like room width plus 100 divided by 32, or you can simply just make sure that your room is always divisible by whatever size of cell that you were using. But it doesn't really matter a whole lot. It's not going to affect the functionality, and as long as we aren't drawing the grid, we are never going to see this gray strip on the side. So I'm going to get rid of the draw event. and we have the grid declared. Everything is fine there. So now I'm going to go to my enemy, and I'm going to be using my enemy. I'm going to tell my enemy to use the grid. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be if ogame.grid does not equal undefined. So all I'm doing here is I'm just making sure that my ogame object, which is creating the grid, has definitively finished creating the grid, and that the grid does exist before I try to use it. I'm going to keep my line of path equals path add. That's important because we're going to need a path. I'm going to go mp grid path. So this is going to be very similar to when we did the path before. Just as a few more arguments. So with the grid path, the first thing we have to do is tell it what grid we want to be using, and we want to be using ogame's grid. And then next, the path we want to be using path. X start is always going to be our X position, and Y start is always going to be our Y position. The X goal is going to be oplayer.x, and the Y goal is going to be oplayer.y. And then allow diagonal, so like a grid is made up of squares, and if you allow diagonal, that will allow it to move diagonally through multiple squares if that is its best path. If you set it to false, it's going to zigzag, going straight from square to square to square to square to create a diagonal that way. It looks a lot smarter, and it's a lot better if you just allow diagonals, so I'm going to set that to true. And then I'm going to say path start. Again, path 3, path action stop, and then absolute I'm going to set to false. And now if I go back to my room, I can actually create a bit of an obstacle course. And then if I run that, as you can see, the enemy is tracking its way to me. Now there are a couple things that we need to clean up with this. For one, the enemy is creating a path and running it. Like, it is running a map through the maze every single frame. And that, especially if you have multiple enemies, can get rather taxing on your processing. And then also the grid that OGame is making, because I've taken OGame to be a persistent object. I want it to be able to make a new grid in every single room. So there's a couple things that we can do to clean this up. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that line. I'm going to paste it here. And then here, I'm going to say if ogame.grid does not equal undefined, I'm actually going to start an alarm. So I'm going to say if alarm 0 equals -1. And that's just making sure that the alarm is not currently running. I'm just going to say alarm 0 equals 1. And then I'm actually going to take these two lines here. I'm going to cut. I'm going to go to my events, and I'm going to open up alarm 0. I'm going to paste them. And then I'm going to say alarm set 0, 30. And that, what that does is that, that makes it so that if this alarm actually does hit 0, it's going to reset it to 30. And then it's going to run this code every 30 frames. I have my game running at 60 frames per second, so every half second, the enemy is going to find a new path in the grid to the player. And that's all I'm going to do for this. And this will make it so that if you have multiple enemies trying to find their way to the player, they won't all be creating and deleting new paths every single frame. And like I said, that can lead to some performance losses when if you have a lot of enemies doing this, you might get lower frame rates. Eventually you might even get like a crash or something. So I'm just going to set an alarm so that it only does this intermittently. And then in my game, I'm going to leave all of this, but I'm also going to open up a new event, and I'm going to go down to other, and I'm going to say room end, and I'm going to go MP grid destroy grid. So that when you are done in a room and you move on to the next room, or level or what have you, it's going to destroy its existing grid. And then I'm going to go to other. I'm going to go room start. And I'm going to take this line. And I'm going to take this line. Next. I'm going to pop that there. And that is how you clean this up. That makes it that at the end of the room, at the end of the level, you're going to destroy your current grid. And then at the beginning, only once at the very start of the next level, you will be creating a new grid. And you can add multiple instances to this. As far as I know, that I personally don't know of a way to be doing this with tile maps rather than object-based collisions. I honestly don't even know if it's possible. If you do figure out a way for it to be possible, let me know. I'm still learning with tile maps. But yeah, so if I run this, it's going to run the same. The only real difference is if it reaches me, it's going to stop moving, and then if I walk away, it's going to take half a second for it to initiate pursuit again. But that is all you really need to know. Like I said, you can throw in multiple enemies. And they're all just going to map my way to you. But situations like this is exactly why I set the pathfinding onto an alarm event. Because, what if you're running around and your player ends up getting, 30 enemies following them? It's a lot for a Gamemaker and a computer to process. So you set it to an alarm so it's not processing it every single frame. But, yeah, that's about it for this tutorial. I like showing you guys how to do things that I myself struggled to learn how to do. Again, a big shout out to One Up Indie. I'm going to have to wrap this up right away here, though. If you have any questions, feel free to comment them down below. I will do my best to answer them. If you have any suggestions for things that you would like to see for future tutorials, again, let me know down in the comments. If you like this video, please like it, and if you want to see more videos like it, or you're interested in seeing what kind of projects I'm working on, feel free to subscribe. But yeah, my dog's been whining, and she's getting kind of crazy, so I need to take her outside to go pee and probably give her her breakfast. So I'm going to have to let you guys go, and I wish you all a good one, and peace out.